Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending our panel, our webinar on Beyond Beijing, Challenges for Women and Girls in Europe and Activism. We have with us women from Europe who are going to tell what their lens is on the changes. It's a very complex time in this world. I'm talking to you. I'm Lois A. Herman. I'm the Managing Director of Women's UN Report Network, also known as One Run. And we have partnered on this panel with Pangea Foundation in Italy. We have some wonderful speakers, so I look forward to their presentations. And we all recognize here in New York at the Commission on the Status of Women and everywhere that this is a very, very serious time. So thank you for joining us, and we are moving around the world now to Europe. Hello, Julie. We are ready for your words of wisdom. You've got a wonderful background to share who you are. We've known each other a while. Julie also arranged a panel that we did at the European Union.
Yes, we had a panel on widows, on the situation for widows with my good friend Margaret Owen, who I believe is in New York currently at UNCSW. I'm not. I'm in the north of England. It's really cold and wet and miserable here, which is why I have this big woolly sweater on. I'm going to speak from some notes, which are on the same iPad as I'm connecting. So I hope that I still stay in the frame and that you can see me. Okay. So I suggested that I should speak about the far right because it has been a kind of political journey for me right from the very beginning, from when I first decided to stand as a candidate for the European elections in 2014. In fact, my motivation to stand came from being very upset and angry about the prevalence of gender-based violence, and I got very involved with 1 Billion Rising. And then when I was selected as a campaigner, one of the things that you have to do as a candidate is you have to go around knocking on doors, you have to speak to communities, and you have to do that right across your kind of constituency. So I was a candidate for the northwest of England, which is a huge region going really between the border of Wales right up to the border of Scotland, including the big cities of Manchester and Liverpool, but also including the large rural area where the Lake District is. And the British National Party, which existed at the time and had 2 MEPs, so this was a party led by a Nazi Holocaust denier. The British National Party actually had its headquarters in this rural part of the northwest, near the Lake District. And I can remember going campaigning in these small towns and villages, and the BNP had a big campaign bus, and they would go and park it outside the schools in the small towns. And when children left the school, they would give out leaflets to the parents, and the leaflets were basically trying to stir up hatred against Muslims, because all they ever talked about was grooming gangs. And if you've been following the horrendous social media account of Elon Musk, you know, he has weaponized this idea of Muslim grooming gangs, and you know, tried in cahoots with Nigel Farage, who is actually now an MP in the British Parliament, has tried very hard to put pressure on the government to reopen a number of inquiries, which in fact that business was already done. But my experience of standing in that political space and realizing, the kind of, if you like, the on the ground activism of the far right in these small communities, which were largely monocultural. So, white communities, not very much ethnic diversity, kind of really alerted me to some of the dangers, really, of the far right. And then I was elected, and so I attended my first sessions in the Parliament in July 2014. And I didn't know of the existence of Breitbart, which is an alt-right, far-right online newspaper. I had no idea about the existence of Breitbart until I was in it. And I was in it because the far right in the European Parliament. Sorry, I should have said that when I stood for that election in 2014, I actually kicked out Nick Griffin, the BNP Nazi. So he wasn't an MEP anymore. But then you've got the kind of what we used to call the BNP in suits. So this is the UKIP party, the Brexit party. These people were in a way much more presentable and appeared to be more reasonable than a kind of outright Nazi. Anyway, so people from the UKIP MEP group had, they'd been in the culture committee where I'd spoken, and they'd stolen a photograph that I'd put of myself on my own Twitter feed, and they'd taken parts of the speech that I'd made, which was about diversity and multiculturalism and intercultural dialogue, a story that I told about some work I'd done with young people, and they put it in Breitbart. And I only knew about it because I suddenly was subjected to an incredible amount of racist, sexist hate online because this had appeared in the online newspaper. And there were other things that happened to me also, like, some of the kind of social spaces within the Parliament where people would kind of hang out having meetings. I realised that somebody had also taken note of what I was wearing one day and had posted something on a Twitter feed about what I was dressed in. So these kind of far right anti-women, anti-feminist forces and anti-migrant, that's really important. These people are anti-migration and Islamophobic. I realized that they were, they had been, that they were in the Parliament with me. They were elected. Many of them in the European Parliament don't have any power because they're in fairly fringe groups. So, and they're generally anti-EU, like the Brexit people. So they don't really ever get any responsibilities within the committees, but they create havoc, and they certainly create a lot of fear for women politicians. Okay, because it is quite a horrendous thing to think that people around you, who've got a kind of badge to get into this institution, are actually behaving in such a way. Anyway, I was also given responsibility in the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee and the FEM Committee, and I was working within the Socialist and Democratic group in the Parliament, which was the second largest political group. And I learned very quickly that we could not really ever use the word family or family values And that is because the right wing promoted the idea of family values in their generally kind of anti-feminist and anti-abortion strategies in their policies. And it made me really, really sad, actually, that we couldn't talk about family. But every time we saw a report or we had some amendments submitted, if we saw the word family in there, we'd have to delete it. We'd have to fight not to have that going forwards. And I always felt really sad about that. And I felt sad because I perceive of families as much more and more wider than a man and a woman married with 2.2 children. For me, same-sex marriages are valid. Adopted children, are within a family. Kinship carers like grandparents, that is also a family unit. So I began to realize very quickly how we had to work within the Parliament to kind of fight against this rather kind of fundamental sort of Christian family, European family values. I think there was a kind of real moment of awakening for me. And it was when a friend of mine she had been working on a report about progress on gender equality. And so it wasn't even going to be a legislative report. But one of the amendments that we lost in that report was about promoting gender studies in universities. And I was astounded. I was totally astounded that we could lose an amendment that promoted gender studies in higher education. And I think that for me was a real kind of, this is what we're up against, okay? We're up against this kind of right-wing backlash that perceives, that perceives gender equality as an ideology to be fought against. And now we have seen that with, there are 4 EU member states that still haven't ratified the Istanbul Convention. Mm-hmm. That's Bulgaria, Lithuania, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia. And they often cite gender ideology. Sorry, I should have mentioned Hungary in there. Hungary also hasn't ratified. Mm-hmm. And of course, Turkey has withdrawn from the Istanbul Convention. And the Istanbul Convention is the single most, most powerful binding mechanism to end gender-based violence. So, as a government, why would you not sign up to that if you clearly want to address the pandemic of gender-based violence? What you should be doing, is signing it, ratifying it, implementing it, and that means putting a budget line against it. So this is kind of what's been happening and coming for several years, because I go back to 2014 and now we are in 2025. So where is this kind of backlash coming from? Well, it's largely, but not only, coming from a kind of fundamental right-wing anti-abortion kind of Christian lobby who promote family values above all else. And that is very exclusionary because it doesn't include rainbow families of same-sex parents. And I learned that some of these kind of very kind of fundamental groups actually have been funneling money into fake NGOs based in Brussels in order to lobby against the kind of promotion of those wider women's rights that we've all been fighting for. But the other people where the backlash is coming from, it's coming from kind of libertarian free speech advocates also, who are often anti-trans. And there's been some very big kind of fights within the UK, at all levels, from kind of grassroots groups, but right up to academics, to media people, and people in the parliament who are, you know, still trying to kind of fight out, you know, what rights should trans people have. There's also a backlash from the kind of hyper masculine male role models. We know about that through people like Andrew Tate, and I'm not going to dwell on that because that's really in the news. But one of the things that brings all these different groups together is their kind of right-wing political views. They're not just anti-women's rights, but they're anti-migrant, they're anti-vax, they're climate change deniers, they're conspiracy theorists. To a degree, they're on that kind of line, somewhere along that line. Some of them say they promote women's rights, but they weaponize Islamophobia to try and prove their point. And I'll just give an example of that. So some of the so-called terrorist attacks that have happened in Germany, which have been horrendous for everybody, they will then weaponize that and say, well, that's because we allowed these Muslim refugees to come and live in this country, forgetting actually that these people are now German citizens and of often, you know, second or third generation. We had to have a response to this within the European Parliament, and it was a campaign that we ran called "Don't Use My Body for Your Racism," because it was very important to stand up for women and women's rights and to say that all violence against women is wrong. But I made a study visit with some other people from the Women's Rights Committee to Munich to look at how the German government welcomed women and children refugees and LGBT refugees into specially created spaces and welcoming facilities for refugees. And the German police in Munich, we talked about this issue, and the German police in Munich said that there was far more violence against women when the beer festival happened, and that this violence is perpetrated by white guys. So it's white blokes basically traveling to Munich to drink loads of beer, get really drunk, and then to commit all kinds of sexual harassment on the streets. But of course, this never makes the newspapers. So, you know, what we have to do is to say that all violence against women is wrong, regardless of where it comes from. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the kind of the weird kind of stuff that's happening in politics right now. So we are now seeing right-wing women leaders, and that kind of adds another kind of perspective to all of this. So in Germany, the leader of the AfD, which is the far-right party, Alice Weidel is a lesbian, and she is married to a Sri Lankan migrant, and they have children. But Alice Weidel is leader of a party that doesn't believe in same-sex, you know, it doesn't believe in the very things that she represents. So this is quite odd, you know, this is kind of like weird stuff happening. We've for a very long time had to deal with Marine Le Pen in France, you know, who is a woman leading a kind of far-right anti-Islamic party. And in Italy, there's Giorgia Meloni. I wouldn't say she's far-right, but she is on the right, and her party has a history of association with an Italian fascist group. And again, these values are very kind of, so her values are very rooted in that kind of Christian fundamentalism. In the UK, Kemi Badenoch, who is descended from a migrant, Black migrant family coming to the UK, being welcomed into the UK, then suddenly became very anti-migrant herself. She one of the things that she said when she, was that the maternity pay in the UK was excessive. I don't consider this statement to come from somebody who's upholding women's rights. So we have to question, we have to question even the people who are coming to positions of power who look like they're pushing against the kind of the model that we all hold in our head. And these extreme right women, they amplify the anti-liberation policies of intersectional feminism. And they do this using broadcast media and social media. And a good example of that is Candace Owens, who is a Black woman Trump supporter, who has a huge following. So I don't want to dwell anymore on all these negative things. I want to talk a little bit about what we have to do about this, because we need to feel some hope and we need to be mobilized. So what can we do? I would suggest that everybody takes an intersectional approach to policy making. We did that in the European Parliament, but it doesn't happen very much in the British Parliament, and I don't see it happening very much in other parliaments. But I learned to use an intersectional approach. And as soon as you understand that multiple identities can often result in multiple discrimination, you know why you need to use an intersectional approach. Our campaigns often use creativity. We kind of combat that awful kind of aggressive kind of online misogyny by using humour. So a great example was a former Conservative MP called Philip Davies was speaking at a men's meeting. This is quite a few years ago now. And at his men's meeting, where he was bemoaning the power of feminists to kind of, to push their case. He said at this meeting, women, those feminists want to have their cake and eat it. And this line was picked up globally, and all around the world, women started posting photographs of themselves eating cake with that hashtag, feminist want cake, will eat it. So this was a really powerful way of actually pushing back against that rather kind of conservative view about feminism. And I wasn't even in the UK at the time. I was at the World Social Forum in Montreal, and the message reached me. So I also took a photo of myself eating cake and put the hashtag up. We also need our male allies. It's very important to have our male allies. And if we are mothers of boys, as I am, we need to bring them up as feminists. In the UK, we have a really powerful Stop Trump campaign, which we've had before, and we're reviving that. And I have to say that is run by two amazing Muslim women, feminist friends who are incredible, really amazing campaigners, and they have mobilized loads of people to come out and to mobilize against Trump's far right and anti-women policies. And then we need our faith allies. And in that respect, I just want to say thank goodness for Marianne Edgar Budd, who made that incredible speech, when Trump and Vance were sitting on the front row, and used her platform to talk about empathy and compassion for people who are other. And thank goodness she did that. And then we need to find our faith allies in other places too. And I would, if you don't know about the amazing LGBT imam, Seyran Ates, who is the imam of a Berlin mosque, I would suggest you look her up, because the Quran isn't anti-women. It's not anti-LGBT. You know, it's my Muslim women friends who choose to wear the niqab, who choose to wear veils. They are with me in my fight against misogyny and violence and against all forms of discrimination. And I'll finish there.
Thank you so much, Julie. You provided information that the global audience today would never have. And I'm very happy to introduce Sadia Mir, who's going to speak too. But when I lived in Italy, they put crosses in some of the schools, and families of migrants objected, and they had to move. They couldn't stay and put their children in those classrooms. I was also called Americana. I lost my identity. I was Americana because I was the only American. So it happens all through you, but also now with the cutting of aid and the conflicts, women's issues have been hit so hard. And you mentioned trans. Well, that's another one that's getting hit. So you are right, and we need more people like you to lead the movements that's going to counter the lashback. It's a very serious time. And I wonder if you know in Lithuania, that hasn't ratified the convention, that they have a little island of land that is Russian. I don't think most people know that. Okay, I would like to next introduce Sadia Mir. She's with One Run as the European Gender Policy Specialist. She's very much involved with what's going on all over Europe, but she lives in London. So, Sadia, are you with us? Sadia has disappeared.
No, I'm here. Hi,
there you
Lois,
are.
can you
Okay.
see me? Hi, I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm here. Hi,
I
hi,
just
hi.
introduced you because you're so special.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm sorry. I was having some issues getting on the Zoom. Couldn't have access either way. So I'm here now, and I'm back to moderating the panel. Is that
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
Okay, excellent. So I just wanted to say a little bit about some of the processes that we, just to bring in the introduction of this wonderful panel we're having, is you know, a little bit about the background of Beijing Action and why it was adopted in 1995. Have we gone through that as yet?
No, not yet.
Right. So Beijing was adopted in 1995, and it highlighted 12 areas where gender injustice could and should be turned into gender equality. And it was a landmark resolution believed by many to have made gender equality the important political agenda that it is, was gearing up to be. I think we're on a trajectory of backsliding, but anyway. The EU as well as the UN emphasize on women's rights being a result of this platform, and the European Institute for Gender Equality supports the member states where it meets the objectives for the platform for action. So that's just a little brief background of Beijing. I have a paper on this, which was published, I believe, and we can go more into that. Simona, you're back. Do you have time? Are you going to speak now? Hello.
Buenos dias.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
That's a deal.
Hello. I just perhaps I can just hear what are you saying and to wrap up. Sorry, because I was just entering now.
Sure.
Well, Julie Ward gave us a really broad spectrum presentation about some of the hurdles she went through in order to be a part of the European Parliament and what's going on with the far right and the lashback against feminists that is spreading around the world and the anti-Muslim position. So I'm sure you can bring up new ideas and build on what she said.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, because I mean, it's 30 years from Beijing, and when I was in '95, I was a student, and I was following all things that were going on with Beijing with a lot of wow, astonishment, and I was amazed by all this. And after 30 years, to see at which point we are is quite interesting, because 30 years ago, I were never thought that we still are stuck at this situation. I would like just to say that in this moment, we in 30 years, we achieved a lot of legal instrument, new law, new convention, new instrument and more budget to follow our, more equality and equity for women. I'm just thinking about Istanbul Convention, for example, or many laws, like, for example, in last year we have the recognition for asylum based on sex discrimination and nationality, for example, for Afghan women at the European Union Just Court. We have some more instruments, but still the majority of women are not reaching the benefit of this instrument that we have. And it's quite interesting to see that there are more women also in power position at political level. But at the same time, this creates more gap with the rest of the other women that are on the floor, and the floor is going down. So this is what I'm really concerned, even for EU policy, because let's say that at this moment, the Europe is going to close themselves and to secure the majority of people that is in a good position, including women. So I really think I see, for example, Italy, that even though a lot of new law, for example, are not enough for fight against violence against women. Just a few days ago, there was the new law on femicide in Italy that recognized de facto the femicide inside the criminal and the penal code. At the same time, justice system, it's very weak in Italy. And still, even if we have a law, the implementation of this law at process level do not arrive to achieve the results. So we are still in the phase of implementation, even if we have more instruments compared to 30 years ago. And what is really scaring me is the reducing of the budget everywhere, in every country of Europe, for women's mainstream implementation of every measure. I see Netherlands, for example, that was always like a kind of feminist or friend, women friend country that now completely cancel budget for women internally and cancel also partially budget for development in cooperation with other countries. This will mean a lot of obstacles for more women. All the vulnerable sector of women will really have a tough moment. We will have a tough moment. We also, that are women organization, will have a tough moment to implement and to support the other women, to get empowerment, to get out from the violence. And this, it's really the big challenge that I see for the future of Europe, that is using all money for more army and taking away money from, let's say, welfare and strength population, strength women, and make a better life for everyone.
Oh, thank you, Simona. I know you're there at the moment, aren't you, at CSW physically?
Yes.
Like Lois, I can't be there. So, yeah, I think we see that even with the elections in Europe, which we followed last year, and the main grouping of the European Parliament's political parties and the way it's going, and how the hemicircle shifted more towards the right base than, the center left that it normally predominates. And so, you saw minority parties and others kind of shrinking in that space and kind of edging out. So, yeah, it's tough times ahead. I think because of increase in conflict and all of that, it sort of justifies the reason to have more military expenditure. But, we are dealing with so many polarizing issues, but also issues such as online cybersecurity. And there's a heap of disparity in that. The agenda for the climate seems to be dropping off the scale. Even in the recent German elections, we saw that, it was always a priority, and it slid right down. So things have been, as Julie's pointed out, kind of engineered for many years to be pushing us in a kind of a corner. But the momentum has been building up. It has been there, but how to return back to it. So I'm going to invite Karine. Are you able to speak now and make your presentation? So we had Karine last year, and she gave us a great insight into the challenges for women with disabilities. And today she's going to talk about, in particular, disabilities for women with disabilities in Armenia accessing their sexual and repro rights. So I'll let you speak and give your findings, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Like Julie told, unfortunately in Armenia, they didn't ratify Istanbul's Convention either, so we are lobbying for it. But thank you very much for the invitation, and it's my honor to be here today. And it's very important for me because I have my voice for ongoing fight for the rights of women and girls with disabilities. And our discussion is very important today because after 30 years of Beijing Platform for Action, many millions of women with disabilities will have challenges accessing our rights, particularly the right of sexual and reproductive health services. So I want to share my example because I was born in Armenia, and Armenia, especially during Soviet times, disability was a stigma. But I challenged a lot of stereotypes, and I was able to reach success. But not only my professional life, but also in personal. But I always wanted to become a mother. I knew it was my mission. But when I started to go to doctor and ask for medical advice, and they didn't support me, and they were very skeptical to my decision. And doctors questioned my ability, my desire, even my right so that I can have a child. And many doctors were asking me, are you sure it is good for you? Can you handle to have a child? and many were very discouraging. But I refused them to define my future. I advocated for myself, and I'm very proud because now I'm a mother of wonderful 3-year-old son. And I should show his picture to you. But
Yes, I've seen the picture of your boy. He's so sweet. Thanks for sharing.
but my journey was not easy, and it was very painful. But many, many women with disabilities are still seen as incapable making decisions about their bodies and about their lives. And in Armenia, during last years, we had many reforms, but they are not enough. And they are not implemented in practice. Many women with disabilities who want to go and access their right to sexual and reproductive health, they face challenges. First of all is physical inaccessible environment. Clinics are not accessible, rooms, furniture are not accessible. For blind women, there are no trade sites, and also many examination rooms, medical procedures are not adapted for women with different types of disabilities. So it prevents us to receive our basic reproductive health care. When deaf women want to go to clinic, there are no sign language interpreters there. So they can't have privacy about their bodies, their lives. And also, sexual and reproductive health education is not available in accessible formats for women with different types of disabilities. There are no trade materials for blind women. Sign language interpretation is not provided. And for women who have intellectual disabilities, there are no easy-to-read materials about their sexual and reproductive rights and also services available for them. And also I mentioned about discrimination and attitude of medical professionals, which I experienced myself, and many, many women continue experiencing this discrimination. And especially those who have intellectual disabilities are the most vulnerable. So these challenges are not just inconveniences, it is violation of our fundamental human rights. And we still need to have a life with dignity. But I am very proud that the organization I founded, we advocate a lot for the sexual and reproductive rights of women with disabilities. We advocate, and thanks to our organization, a lot of policies were amended, and also we have many trainings for medical professionals but it should come from state. It should come from system, because we NGOs, we can't do everything. It should be all organized by state. So I have many recommendations, but I should mention only a few. I want to call everyone for action and ensure that all healthcare facilities are accessible for everyone, for every woman. And also information about sexual and reproductive health services should be accessible in different formats. And also training of medical professionals is very crucial. So it's all women, when they seek services about their reproductive health, they receive same dignity of care as all other women. And as Beijing Platform for Action promised us a world where all women, including women with disabilities, have full and equal access to healthcare and bodily autonomy. And I want to thank organizers of this webinar again. And I'm happy we are here together, strong women, and we are all support each other. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Corinne. That was really wonderful to hear, but also heart-wrenching in a way that, you know, we're still having to fight for basic things. Last year, when we had the consultations here with Reem Al-Salam, who is the special rapporteur for the UN Working Group on Violence Against Women, we learned from other organizations here in the UK how what you talk about, the facilities are being taken away. And as Lois would know as well, that, you know, more and more of this sector seems to get privatized, seems to be commercialized, and it should be something that is a norm that is provided by the government for the people. If here we have a good system, it was existing, but more and more we see that it's sort of fragmenting, especially post-COVID, and especially in these areas of, you know, having the facilities, finding the facilities, where do you go to, that information. That I think the last 14 years have been particularly bad, and also since the austerity measures taken to actually cut the policies which looked after women's rights. But we can have a discussion towards the end of the panel. I am going to invite, because of timing, Anna Zobnina, who is with the European Migrant Women's Network, and she'll tell us a little bit about their work and how their policies are being, the current situation with Europe and migrant women. Hi, Anna.
Hi everyone. Thank you very much, Sadia. Thank you for the invitation. I'm going to speak a little bit about the kind of EU situation in relation to migrant and refugee women. That's primarily because our work, the work of our network, is focused on EU institutions and EU processes. We work also at the international level, and like we're also present in Commission on the Status of Women right now. But our main focus of work is really the EU. And it remains a very important actor. And us as migrant women being in the EU, we often evaluate our position and often think about how actually privileged and safe and secure we are still, despite tremendous challenges that we're facing, and I'm going to speak about them, but comparing to many other regions, we are constantly reminded of all the safety and wealth that we can experience in Europe in comparison with overwhelming majority of the world. And we know it because the women who come to Europe, they come from those places where they do not only, I mean, they don't have protections, they don't have they don't have legal means, any kind of legal means. What Simona was talking about, of course, we don't need to mention the situation in Afghanistan, but Afghanistan is not the only country where there is a deep systemic entrenched violence and discrimination at a state level exercised towards women. And I think this perspective informs a lot of our work. For us, global solidarity is extremely important. We, as I said, we focus on the EU level, meaning European Parliament, European Commission, and the Council of the European Union. All the three bodies are quite difficult right now to work with. They have never been easy, but yes, since the last elections of the European Parliament, there have been some changes in the constitution and the power composition of the European Parliament. We're kind of still mapping our allies and trying to understand with whom we can work. But what I want to note in relation to the backlash against women, and for us it is always at the intersection with the backlash against migrants, refugees, and generally people who choose to, and I use this word consciously, choose, because a lot of migrant women actively choosing to relocate to another country. In some cases, there is practically no choice at all, but very often migration involves very concrete planning on behalf of women to escape particular situation and make the best choices that they can possibly have, especially when it comes to their children, to avoid forced marriage, to avoid female genital mutilation, to avoid sexual exploitation and prostitution, trafficking, or simply being in a situation of domestic violence when no community, no family members, no government, and not even civil society organizations or shelters exist or can protect you. What we see right now, this backlash, definitely does not come just from the far right. For us, it is very clear that the backlash, what we call the two-sided war on women. It comes also very actively from the organizations and entities and individuals who would normally call themselves progressives. But in fact, they promote extremely damaging and extremely harming to women, including migrant women, policies and agenda. They're most often kind of libertarian, neoliberal groups, and very often it is NGOs who position themselves as kind of doing public good, but in reality, for example, a lot of them promote decriminalization of pimping and decriminalization of effectively sexual exploitation of women, and like the Dutch model on prostitution. I can give you a concrete example, a very powerful organization, Family Planning Association, who receive very large funding from the European Union, from the European Commission to promote gender equality. Actually, in their work and their actual policies that they're promoting, very often we find ourselves on completely opposite sides of the debate. In fact, right now we are participating in a legal challenge of Belgian law that legalized pimping. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is because, of course, this is one of the most severe and extreme forms of violence against women, sexual exploitation and prostitution, where overwhelming majority of victims are migrant women. either women from outside of Europe or from inside the European Union countries like Romania, Bulgaria, a lot of Baltic states, Poland. We see a very strong push towards preserving the industry of sexual exploitation, keeping women in subordinate positions. Very often they come from organizations who normally you would expect that they have some feminist analysis and understanding, but unfortunately, no. So we are now in a situation when we have a legal battle. We have migrant women organizations who do not want to be in prostitution. We have our network, we have our members, and a whole range, 9 feminist women rights organizations in Belgium, versus on the other side, in the constitutional challenge of the Belgian law on prostitution, organizations like Family Planning Association, all the transgender groups, ILGA, Europe, who promotes rights of gays and lesbians, and also, surprisingly, an organization who promotes the rights of undocumented persons, because they believe that for migrant women, prostitution is a reasonable career choice. So I want to kind of put it very clearly that we battle with we are in 2 wars at the same time. I don't think that was the situation in the past. I think that, as Sadia mentioned, a lot of issues have polarized to an extreme right now. It's even impossible sometimes to have a conversation about very basic things. Like when we have the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, Rima Al-Salem, being publicly attacked and smeared by organizations like Women Deliver, or Family Planning Association, who write a global letter denouncing Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women. I think we're in a big trouble. And I think that what it requires is a very, very comprehensive thinking. And how did we end up in this situation? For us, for migrant women, migrant and refugee women-led organization, I can say that we fall in between, in the cracks between kind of these 2 patriarchal forces that are fighting with each other. And I think women more generally fall into this crack, where to some extent the kind of collateral damage of those patriarchal forces trying to sort out the power between themselves. For us, what we see on the one hand, of course, European Union, I think it's not a news to anyone, has been increasingly over the years adopting a very hostile to migrants and refugees policies and laws. I can tell you, I will not go into details, would not bore anyone with complex legislative documents. For example, we have the EU Migration Pact. It's a very large package of different legislations. There are around 10 of them. And apart from the fact that a lot of this pact is kind of rooted in the idea that migration per se is a violation of sovereignty of states and a harmful phenomenon. Apart from the fact that there is very little consideration to basic fundamental human rights that, I mean, they're ignored throughout those legislative texts. Apart from the fact that migration policies become externalized, meaning that basically, in very simple terms, European Union pays to countries outside, be it Turkey or Libya or Morocco, makes agreements with them to keep the migrants out. Apart from the fact that it is only about taking the most qualified, the most skilled, the most educated migrants, so contributing to this already huge imbalance between Europe and other regions, or between the global north and the global south, and kind of creating this brain drain for other countries. So on top of all of this, in the entire migration pact, which is several hundred pages, if we put all of these documents together, women are mentioned maybe, I don't know, 7 or 10 times. This tells us everything where we are in terms of the so-called gender mainstreaming that the European Commission put all over the place, and they're all supposed to mainstream gender. And of course, nobody knows what gender is. So anybody is a gender expert these days. It's a total mess. So in the European Commission, the most used word is intersectionality. Now everybody is intersectional, everybody is doing gender mainstreaming. The result is that women are eliminated from the document. They don't even appear. So we can't even say, oh, this is bad in relation to women, because women don't even exist as any kind of meaningful category in those documents. Yesterday, European Commission published a proposal for returns directive. So we have a return directive. It's a directive which the name speaks for itself. It's about how European Union returns people to the country of origin. It basically is the direction about deportation. And it is from 2018, and now they're proposing amendments to it. So it's a very clear trajectory. There is a complete deterioration. There is no safeguarding. We predict that women, now our target group, women and girls, and women with their families, of course, will simply be put in the hands of traffickers. I mean, I'm speaking about really the most vulnerable women, those who came maybe through the trafficking routes, like the women from Nigeria that we argue in front of the European Court of Human Rights, that they deserve to be protected just on the basis that they are women coming from this specific region of Nigeria, where practically most women and girls in those villages have been trafficked. They have been wiped out. So our argument is that if you have a woman coming from this region, just like if you have a woman coming from Afghanistan, you do not need to look at individual circumstances, whether she is at the risk of being persecuted, whether there is somebody who is trying to kill her. Just the fact that she's a woman and she comes from this place should suffice for a migration or asylum tribunal to grant her protections. Now, this return directive completely obliterates the possibility of doing such things because it completely and entirely ignores any kind of safeguardings of an assessment on which grounds women are arriving and on which grounds they could be granted international protection or the full refugee status. And this is just one example. Again, I'm not going to bore everyone with millions of other examples from legislation, but this is a general trend. And I have to say it has been adopted by left and right and center. This is kind of a taken for granted situation right now. And then on the other hand, we have the women's rights legislation. And so we work at the crossroads of those two policy areas. And what we see is there are attempts to not only maintain the protections and the standards on human rights of women, but also introduce some new things. So, for example, the European Union last year, they adopted the Directive on Violence Against Women, which was supposed to be a kind of a mirror instrument based on the Istanbul Convention. But in reality, what happens, it is a much, much weaker legal tool in terms of its content, in terms of the substance. It can be enforced because it is a EU directive, and that's the advantage of it if you're a member of EU. But in terms of what it covers, what aspects of violence it covers, we basically ended up having an EU directive that does not have rape inside. So, I mean, it's a scandal. We have been fighting ferociously for preserving. Originally, it was in the draft. Rape was in the draft as a criminal offense, as a part of sexual violence. And then eventually it was eliminated. It was eliminated by the Council of Europe. It was eliminated by progressive states, by Germany and France at the lead. And then the European Parliament backed down, and they decided it's better that we adopt something than we adopt nothing. So we have a strange directive on violence against women that does not have rape inside. It does not mention sexual exploitation, even though the legal basis for this directive is sexual exploitation of women and children in the European Union treaties. It makes a very strange gradation and differentiations between different types of violence. It very clearly has a racist undertone, because a lot of aspects of violence covered in the directive is specifically that affects migrant communities. Female genital mutilation, we know, yes, it is an issue that it is a problem or a practice that is prevalent in specific groups, and those are not European groups. But why to give so much space to this type of violence and then not to include rape? And that's because everybody agrees that, yes, female genital mutilation is bad and migrants are doing this, and therefore we're okay to have this as part of the instrument. But when it comes to rape, any man commits rape, any man can commit rape from any ethnic group. And this becomes more complicated. And then we have the issue of the age of consent that is very different among different states. In some states, the age of consent is still 14 in the EU. And so therefore, they just excluded it from the directive. Another problem that we have is that, for example, when it comes to online violence, there is cyberbullying and harassment and so on, but only if it causes what they call serious harm. There is no definition of what serious harm is. It is left to the discretion of judiciaries probably, and investigators, and probably the reports of the victim. Of course, there will be big problems with implementing this, because a lot of this, when it comes to harms to women, as we know, it is very often not seen and not kind of argued as a serious harm. Again, this is just like one example. We have other legislative processes happening, including right now the revision of Victims' Rights Directive, which is also very important. It's about all victims, but the problem with this directive is precisely because it is about all victims. It symmetrizes violence against women, male violence against women, with other types of violence. And in this sense, we fear that there will be not a backlash, but there will be a weakening, a potential weakening of certain protections. Just like we saw, incorrect implementation. For example, Finland, when they implemented the Istanbul Convention, simply because in the Istanbul Convention, one paragraph or one article says that it also applies to all victims of domestic violence, so therefore it can apply in theory to men. Finland, one of the most progressive states in Europe, decided, oh, well, we're just going to make all the shelters for all victims sex neutral. We mix women and men. So, I mean, and this is completely against this. So then the Grevio committee came and said, excuse me, you really did not get it right. This is not what the Istanbul Convention is about. We need single sex spaces for the victims. We're very clear about it. So then Finnish government changed it back, but we have like funny instances like this, how governments are trying to read and implement, or misread rather, kind of strong and progressive legislation. This is, I think, I do not know if I need to add anything, maybe on what we are trying to do as a European network of migrant women. First of all, in comparison with many big, very well-funded networks and organizations in Europe, of course, our resources are very limited, and we are very kind of grassroots-led, and grassroots actions and the voices from women on the ground is extremely important for us. Nobody really, big funders are not very interested in this. We, therefore, it gives us, on the one hand, a degree of liberty and flexibility, because we're not dependent on the big funders like a lot of other organizations. And we actually have our freedom of speech, and our freedom of expression is extremely important for us. A lot of us come from countries and regions where this right has been suppressed or entirely eliminated. So we're quite sensitive about it, and we're quite radical in our actions and in our approach, and we're proud of this. So in this sense, we're smaller, we're quite underfunded, but we maintain our values. We do not give up into big funders' pressures to change our values, to change our language. We listen to the women very carefully. We're very proud of our diversity inside our network. And what we decided, we cannot go against the big guys. I cannot stand up against Trump personally, or I mean, in my case, probably it's not Trump, it's actually Putin. But we decided to invest in building structures and networks and building capacity. I think we have to be very realistic. At this point, I think we decided to invest in women because we believe that unless we have a critical mass of women with awareness raising, yes, because as was mentioned before, we can have women in power and it doesn't change things. Sometimes it makes things worse because they're used as a screen for harmful actions towards women. So we spend a lot of time on awareness raising, building capacity, working directly with migrant women, building migrant women leaderships. We had projects, wonderful projects on political participation of migrant women. We have been building the first in Europe and actually in the world case law database on legal cases of human rights of migrant women. And we are now starting quite a large project in which we will be supporting capacity building of 99 grassroots NGOs that are working directly with migrant and refugee women in the aspects of, well, it's about EU values and about promoting civic political participation and combating violence against women. So that's our kind of next big exciting things that we're doing together with 4 of our member organizations. I'm going to finish here. Thank you.
Oh, great, Anna. Thanks for that update. Maybe you could send us some more information about the 4 organizations you're basing this with. And you also spoke about the Violence Against Women Directive. I know it came under a lot of criticism. We did follow it. And I think there's an article here that, you know, it was kind of what we call a little bit of window dressing. And also recently, you know, we see a lot of women elected, like you've said, and it's like the old times when Margaret Thatcher was railed as, you know, the first woman prime minister or sort of power in this country, and she really didn't do that much for gender rights. I mean, it's like having male allies into offices that are not really supporting the background work and what we understand, I guess, as women's rights or gender rights. But I think also this is slightly problematic because this space keeps changing too, you know, and even with the recent criticism of Miss Ursula, and the commission and the way that, you know, things are going with the commission and election and representation of women, just because women holders are in office doesn't mean that we get any representation, at least in the areas that we want to see progress. And yeah, so yeah, it's interesting that you've talked about building the structures with networks. That's, I think, the way to go in all of this capacity building, the data of case-by-case women. That's really, really useful, because to think that to date you don't have a database like that it's just crazy. So those are some of the positives from your side, I think, and some things to perhaps work on and some things to engage with. I mean, if you send us more details, we can also share on our listserv. So thank you to all the panelists. I think we've had a really good discussion. Sorry, I could not get on the webinar earlier. I'm going to open this now for question answers, if there's any questions in the audience or a general discussion. Sarah, do we have any?
Yes, there is a question. Let's see
Mhm.
here. We have an open question. Okay, it looks like that was answered. Thank you. Julie, I'll just read this aloud to see if any of the other panelists would like to weigh in. It says, thank you for sharing. In your opinion, what are the next actionable steps needed to address gender equity in the UK? How would you evaluate our progress on Beijing Declaration so far? So that was one question that came in. And Lois is next with a question. So, Sadia?
Okay, Lois, go ahead.
Well, the care economy is a major issue for women. I know that the European Union has tried for years to make a general type of law, and it continues to be a problem in the US and around the world. There was a time when everyone thought, oh, grandma will take care of your kids, or someone, a good friend or a neighbor. No. And I know I saw it in Italy. What's happened? The birth rate goes down because women want to work or need to work, and someone needs to care for children if they are part of the family. So I'm just wondering if any of you have any ideas on that. There are no easy solutions.
Oh,
I think we're
sorry.
seeing this here at CSW that women have actually been fighting in the elevator over positions on abortion and birth control.
I'm not sorry I understood the question. Maybe could you repeat it or rephrase maybe?
Yeah, it's the care economy
Mhm.
to provide government support for some forms of childcare so that women can work and not be dependent, if it's even possible, on family members.
Mm. Yeah. Sorry, I mean, I have an opinion about this. I think we need to work on the rights of mothers more generally. I think it's a very big blind spot in the feminist movement. This is my personal view. We have been recently collaborating more and more with organizations like Make Mothers Matter, for example, the network. We really see there is a lot of emphasis on the kind of the choice, and it's all of course very important that, of course it's fundamental whether you want to have children or not, how many children, but once you have the children, and the reality is that in majority of cases, for example in our target group, migrant women, overwhelming majority of them are women, and we feel very sorry sometimes that these women, they really become, you see a lot of potential, a lot of motivation, and then they become wrapped in completely childcare and they disappear. We lose these women. They fall out for maybe 10 years sometimes, and then they come back. And of course, it's a loss in professional development and other issues. But it starts with the fact we do not have allocated funding to support mothers. We do not have a recognition of the importance of motherhood or maternity, let alone the fact that we're now even do not, I mean, it's not even the word mother is being contested. So we are in a very serious dark ages, I think, when it comes to women's, what's written in CEDAW. It's the women's role in procreation that should not be treated as a ground for discrimination, whether from one side or from the other. And I think until we resolve fundamentally, even within the feminist movement, this aspect of motherhood, what it means and what it brings to society, and how it should be supported without stereotyping it at the same time. I don't think that we can propose like practical solutions to this, because people in power and the men, they're not interested. They don't have benefits from this, let's put it this way.
It's very insightful. Thank you. Karen, did you want to say?
I don't know how it is in European countries, but in Armenia, the government has support to those mothers who want to work, but in order to qualify, they should have very minimum income. If their income is minimum, government pays for child care. But if their income is more than minimum salary, they don't pay. I think this is discrimination because child care services supported by government shouldn't be based on income level of mothers. It should be for everyone. And also, they only pay those who are not close family members. But again, it is not that. It should be for everyone. Woman should have a choice who she wants to be the caregiver of her child. Government role is to support and pay for child care. This is the situation in Armenia.
Thank you. Stadia, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, in Europe, I should say. Now I know with Brexit, I have to specify in England, in London. Stadia, you may have seen the BBC documentary on single mothers living together. They group together in one place and take care of the children of each one. And that seems to appeal to some people because it enables different roles to exist if you craft it yourself. But single women with children are a huge issue in the United States too.
Yeah, I think for a long time we were, for some reason, called the nanny state, and that now no longer is an option for many people, like having access to housing or social housing, which is very important. It's also, I think, the current situation with the let's see if it happens with the canvassing for the recent election, which won the Labour Party, was to create more social housing, and especially housing for those who were, in need as such. But yes, Julie, do you want to have anything to say on this?
Yeah, I think this issue about motherhood is really interesting. So when I was speaking, I talked about my dismay about the fact that we could never talk about families. We had to strike out all references in our policies, in our amendments, in our reports. So I'm just thinking about my own kind of family situation, because I have a son and his partner. They're in a civil partnership. They have 2 little children. I have 2 grandchildren. And my son would absolutely love to be a stay-at-home dad, right? He would love to do that, but the situation in the UK doesn't really allow for him to do that, which I think is really quite sad. So we definitely have to change things. I'm a great supporter of universal basic income, because I think that would really take away a lot of the problems that we have. And there would just be a kind of safety net for everybody. And I know that in Finland they did a pilot. It didn't seem to work that well, but in Ireland they're currently doing a pilot for UBI within the cultural sector, and that's the sector that I work in, and it's incredibly low paid for everybody. Only a few people ever make a lot of money out of being an artist or a musician or a writer. So if you choose that path, usually you're choosing a path that means you're never going to have very much money, and it's quite difficult, you know, to think about having a house, having a family, all the rest of it. So universal basic income, I think, is something that we should really, really push. And within the cultural sector where I'm living in the northeast of England, there's a really amazing project that's just come on stream called Mother Other, which has been a project that has recognised that within the cultural sector there are many mothers and carers, and they don't want to necessarily stop their work as a creative artist. And this project and program has recognised that and given artists who are mothers the time and space and the money and the support to both continue their creative cultural careers, and also all the support that they need in order to either bring their children to work or to, you know, have flexible hours, or just to have the support that they need. I think there's also a wider national campaign called PIPA, which is something to do with parents participating in the arts, I think it stands for. So within some of the sectors, people are starting to take a look at this. Yesterday, I was at a performance of a play by an amazing women's theatre company called Open Clasp, and it was about mothers who were incarcerated. So it was about mothers in prison and the lack of rights that they have. And they did talk about a motherhood charter in this, in the panel at the end of the play. So again, we should be looking, you know, where are these initiatives happening? They're often happening in very kind of, you know, niche areas of our lives, but actually they could be shared and broadened out. The last Labour government actually had a fantastic scheme called Sure Start, which the Conservatives then trashed and got rid of. But Sure Start was a great programme that gave all small children and families the opportunity to have these dedicated spaces where children and families could receive the kind of care that they needed and the support that they needed, you know, as families bringing up kids, but also you know, gave parents the time to also pursue their careers. So we have had in the past really good policies that were supported by the state and which were successful. And one of the really sad things, you know, about kind of policy made around parliamentary, the life of a parliament, is that you have maybe 4 or 5 years, you know, of something that works, and then somebody else, a different party, comes in and they just out of spite kind of, you know, they trash the good policies of the last government rather than thinking about actually that works, we should continue that. So, and this is a particular problem with our system, which is a two-party system, really. And in the first answer that I gave, question that was typed into the Q&A on this webinar, my first answer was we have to change electoral systems where they disadvantage women, and we have to change. So if we had a system of PR in this country, I think we would get more women we'd get more women elected. And if we had more women elected, more women in government, more women ministers, more women working in those kind of lead roles, actually maybe we would have more kind of more women-friendly, more parent-friendly, more child-friendly policies. And people should really remember that when women are at the table, everybody wins, right? And often, you know, it makes economic sense. Women make policies that are good for everybody. So, you know, we absolutely need women at the table because we do that broader thinking.
Yeah, and there's also research that showed that women who were decision makers, their decisions were long lasting and they weren't futile and, you know, short spanned, and profitable for maybe a minority. There's another question in the from the audience by Bestie, hope I'm saying it well. How would you evaluate the effectiveness of the Istanbul Convention, especially regarding cyber violence against women and the rise of online offences? Do you think it will be possible for the states to agree on expansion of the convention or draft another one in the near future? What do we make of that? Anybody?
Yeah.
Go on, Julie. I will add later.
Okay, it's really great being on a panel with you, Anna. I'm really glad to be in this panel with you. I also share your absolute hatred and dislike of Putin. I'm involved in the Ukraine Solidarity campaign, and we have 2 days of Ukraine Solidarity conference in Brussels coming up at the end of March. I hope that you'll be part of that. So I just want to talk a little bit about the tech world, because it's very fast moving and policies and laws are not. So what I always felt, and I did work a little bit on some tech policies in the culture and education committee, and it always felt like we were at the bus stop and the bus had left, right? And this is because it takes a very long time. You know, European legislation is very deliberative, so it takes a long time to listen to all the different parties, all the social partners, you know, the back and forth between the different institutions, and it's not an effective way of making any kind of policy in a fast-moving world where tech entrepreneurs are racing ahead, and you know, the landscape was just changing all the time. So I know this doesn't really answer the question, but we definitely need some mechanisms to respond much more quickly to those fast changing environments. And we saw how during COVID, the kind of tech innovation, you know, the fact we're on Zoom now, we're doing webinars, you know, we'd never have been doing all of this beforehand. So tech innovation is very, very fast, but the kind of the policy and the legislative field is very, very slow. And I think that makes things really problematic. I don't know whether or not things could be strengthened and worked on at a better international level through the Internet Governance Forum, which is something that I was part of as a representative for my political group. I'll put a link in the chat to IGF. I don't know, that might be a mechanism that would work better, or at least feed into this.
But also I remember Dubravka Simonovic, who was the previous rapporteur for the Working Group on Violence Against Women. She told us that there are existing laws even beyond beyond the Istanbul Convention that cover or can be adopted and adapted to be used as tools to start to govern the internet. So they're there. They need to perhaps be dug up and ratified and just thrown across the rest of the member states. Anna, do you have anything on this?
Yes, I would like to say two things. I think currently, at the current state of affairs, it's very dangerous to try to open any legislation for amendments, because we can end up weakening things rather than strengthening them. And it concerns a whole range of areas of women's rights, but like one of them, we just saw what happened with the Violence Against Women Directive. It was a very good initiative. It was a very good idea. It got stripped of so many things along the process that at the end of the day, okay, the one positive thing about it is that there are states who have not ratified the Istanbul Convention, and now they have at least some instrument that can be enforced through the EU law, and this is the Violence Against Women Directive. The fact that this directive does not have rape inside is not particularly helpful for either rape victims or violence against women sectors as a whole. So the same with everything that has to do with the digital sphere. What we see also is a very dangerous trend of, I think I mentioned a little bit, that there is a gradation and kind of hierarchy of violences that they create with it. It's not only online, it's with kind of, I don't want to say real violence, because the online violence can be as real as the one that happens like with physical bodies. But there is, for example, a distinction that they're trying to draw at the international level. And this includes, because they just worked on the Global Future, the UN big conference, where they adopted the framework on internet technologies. And there is a lot on hate crime and hate speech online and harassment and bullying and cyber abuse and image-based abuse. What is missing is pornography. As far as we are concerned, with our positions, you cannot, I mean, it's the same like trying to work for women's rights, but then having women for sale in a brothel just around the corner so nobody sees it. It's the same kind of thing when they're trying to combat online violence. But as long as you pay for it, and as long as you're over 18, and as long as this woman said yes, never mind that she comes from a background where she was raped at the age of 8, and she does not have an understanding of healthy sexual relationship, and a lot of women in pornography end up, the state of being objectified is normalized for them because they have been conditioned through the violence, like a lot of women in prostitution. Never mind all of this. So, women who are working in the offices, or women, if they're in some online forums and they receive pictures of unwanted sexual images, then it's abuse. But as long as you pay for this, when the payment comes in, or if we're speaking about huge online platforms like Pornhub, then things all of a sudden becomes very ethically complicated, and all of a sudden it's not an abuse anymore. Where in fact, this is the biggest form of online abuse. It is absolutely by far the largest hate speech against women and the largest form of abuse that exists, and it exists historically, and now it exists like online. So we as a network always very cautious about any legislation that looks at online violence and ignores the sale, objectification, and very real harm caused to women in pornography.
Agreed.
And how a lot of this is now being normalized through the internet,
Yes.
And through things like deepfake, morphing images, doxing, all of that we are aware of. Corinne, would you like to say something on that? Oh, Lois, go ahead, please.
I was going to mention that you have in UK what they call lad mags.
Yeah, lad mags.
Those
yes,
are like
we do.
Penthouse, okay? And so there was a program that included women leaders from several European countries that tried to make those be taken down. So what happened was they just moved them up higher.
Yes, they moved them
And
up higher.
so many of the advertising and marketing mechanisms use women as a draw, as potential customers, and young girls. We've even had suicides. I know not only in the US, about girls who have felt overwhelmed that their picture that maybe at one time they sent has been centered all over and used against them and resulted in so much shame they couldn't live with it. These are real objectification tragedies.
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead, Corinne.
I only want to mention about all the online violence against women with different types of disabilities, because women, they were historically isolated. Now with digitalization, they find it opportunity to communicate with others, but we have many posts by our beneficiaries how they were violated, taking their pictures after their blackmailing. It's horrible, and it's very sad we don't have any instruments to protect the rights of women, all women who face like cyber violence attack. And so we need a lot of education, empowerment. It's very important.
Yeah,
As we're
I'm just going to say we did do a webinar with the European Parliament group on online safety for women and girls, and it was quite well attended. And I think that this is something that really does need to be highlighted, the aspect of, you know, online safety for disabled women and girls. It's really, it needs a entire section of its own completely, because there's so many things here that need to be redressed and highlighted and pointed out and flagged, basically. So thank you for that. I think going forward, we really, or anybody who's in any kind of organization or listening to us, please, you know, highlight that this needs an entire report of its own, in a sense, because the vulnerability and the exploitation is so grave. Lois, you were going to say something?
Yes, I totally agree with you, but here we are at CSW, the Commission on the Status of Women, and there are a significant number of people who want to rewrite the Beijing Declaration, but they are afraid, as our previous speakers have said, they're afraid that it will be weakened. But it's not meaningful if you have a country-wide report that's very, very generic, very much like they do every year, that they're doing everything right. But the Beijing+30 cannot point to a lot of areas that life has improved for women in Europe or around the world.
Yeah. I'm just going to share this thing from Julie with the people in the chat.
Wonderful. And we are a little over time on our panel, so we would have a couple minutes to have some closing thoughts, if you don't mind.
Thank you to the speakers and the panelists, and for making time and sharing your insights. It's really helped to get a semblance and picture of what's happening in Europe right now. I'm very encouraged to hear about some of the things like the database. I think it's a good start. Also quite discouraged as how things are going anyway, but it's good to have us all collaborate and support each other where possible, and hear from the specialists and hear from the experts, and all the time and the dedication they put into this, really with very little returns. It's an uphill struggle for most of us, and we'll continue.